appreciate everyone taking the time to give us time to figure out what's going on. So we're just going to start over again. So we want to thank everyone for taking the time to be with us on the different zip codes and everywhere that you're at. We appreciate the effort and the time taken to be with us. By way of brief introduction, my name is Weech. I'm the Vice President of Sales here at Executech. I've been with the company for just over 7 years. Later on in the presentation, we're going to hear from Chris Nokes, who's our Chief Technology Officer, been with the organization for 15, and Nathan Valentine, one of our senior cloud engineers, has been with us for just over 6 years. So we're going to hear from their expertise on how to implement cloud and some of the questions and concerns that clients have been asking us. So part of this presentation, we have 3 questions embedded throughout my section of the presentation today. As you can see here, the menti.com is where you would go on your smart device or on your computer, type in that code, and then you'll be able to see not only the question, but the answers from everybody else as we kind of participate in those 3 questions. Don't worry about it. If I skip forward and you don't kind of jump into the menti.com, the very top bar where it says join at menti.com will be at the top of each one of the slides for about the next 8. So you'll be able to see that as well. By way of quick introduction to Executech, if you're not familiar with who we are and what we do, we were been in business, founded in 1999 by Eric Montague. So we've been in business for quite a long period of time. We have 3 main pillars of our organization. The first one, as you see, is managed IT support. This is your day-to-day operational, the servers, the firewalls, the switches, access points, devices. Chris and Nathan are part of our Azure Cloud Solution partner, and they will discuss, of course, the pilot and kind of what's going on from there. And then we have a whole separate division, our cybersecurity division, headed up by Tyler Rasmussen here in the family as well. So from an agenda perspective, just wanting to let you know what we're going to be discussing. We're going to discuss what Copilot is, what can it do, why is it valuable? How can it be valuable? What approach should we take to rolling this out? Can we just open it up to everybody? Are there cautions that we need to take? And then understanding the risks of what we are. And there will be a Q&A at the very end. So if you have questions, our Director of Marketing is monitoring the chat. You can put him in there and he can let us know what those are. Or feel free, we will open up the mic as well if you care to do that. And we'll just kind of take questions as they come in at the very end. So let's just discuss the first question here. If everyone is on Menti, what do you already know about Copilot? All right, so just reading some of the questions that you kindly put into the chat. AI generation of images often result in strange, deformed people. That's a very good point. I've learned that what Copilot is for Office 365, hoping to learn what it will do. That's a great thing for us to touch on today. Rookie just learning. Appreciate the honesty on that one. As this thing has been rolled out, I think a lot of us have really come up with a lot of different ideas of kind of what's going on there. So appreciate that. And then we've kind of discussed this already, but kind of what do you already know about? And, you know, a lot of us are learning. So I think we're really going to learn a lot about what Copilot can do, what are the risks, what are the positive things that can actually happen. So just going forward, let's just discuss Microsoft Copilot and kind of what it is and what's happening with it. So Microsoft Copilot, this is straight off a Microsoft website. It leverages the power of AI to boost productivity, unlock creativity, and helps you understand information better with a simple chat experience. With the kind of explosion of Chat GPT, just AI, different functionalities in our overall lives, people are starting to get very familiar with what AI and the power AI can do from kind of maybe a higher level perspective. Microsoft has just built up a platform, Copilot, to be able to use it in the business functionality inside of the Microsoft ecosystem. So what can Microsoft Copilot actually do? It can help you search, retrieve information that you need, text generation, image creation, as the person mentioned. Sometimes you need to be careful about the image creation. It might look great, might not look great. You need to be careful with some of the text generations. What I mean by that is don't simply type it in and copy and paste it into something you're going to send out. Make sure you proofread it and maybe change it a little bit to be in your language so it sounds like it's coming from you. And then some people aren't unaware that you can actually use it for code writing. So you can actually do some codes. And if you're not quite familiar with that, I'd be caution you not to be writing codes for your overall business, but you can use it as well to do that. So those are some great things that it can do. Where can you find it? A lot of people have been asking, where can you go and see it? Or how can you kind of test it, kind of start using it? The first one is really simple. They actually have a website, copilot@microsoft.com. You can go to the website and you can just start typing it in. It's not hard, kind of like a search engine kind of bar where you'll ask it a bunch of questions. More information you give it, the better the results of what you do. Inside of Microsoft Windows 11, there's a sidebar where it is. Maybe you've seen it already, but it's already there. In Bing Search and in the mobile app, you can see it as well. And then in the Microsoft Edge. So basically anything inside of the Microsoft ecosystem has the ability to use Microsoft Copilot. So one of the things that we've been asking a lot, or been asked a lot, is what can I actually use it for? I kind of have an idea of what it does. I kind of have an idea of where to find it, but what can I actually use it for in a business actual application? So one of the things that it's really interesting to use is you can use it to understand the implications of a decision. You can have Microsoft, for instance, you can have Copilot on your Teams. It can translate your Teams meetings that you have. Once the meeting is over, it takes all that data, and then you can start asking it questions. You can ask it to put an agenda together for the next meeting. You can ask it even the feelings somebody has in a meeting. Was it a positive impression? Was it a negative impression? And based on the data and the transcript that it has, it's going to generate that type of information. Learn new skills, kind of like a search engine, if you will. You can ask Copilot, can you help me understand blank better? And it will help you to understand that and show you the right way to do it. Analyzing data, a lot of forms. Chris and Nathan are going to get into this a little bit too. Analyzing the data and what you need to be careful of when you're analyzing data. Sometimes it's not exactly accurate, so there is some carefulness that needs to take place with it. Summarize a PDF, open in Edge. You can write better code, as I mentioned earlier. You can even plan a business trip. This is something that I learned. I didn't realize Copilot could do this. I can tell it that I'm taking a business trip to Dallas, Texas for the following days. Find me a hotel within a 5-mile radius of blank convention center, and it will actually go find you everything you want, from your airline to your hotel to your car rental. It will give you a complete itinerary for you if it wanted to. It can generate social media content for those of us in the business world. Maybe you're on the marketing team or you do some of your own marketing. You can use it to create your social media post. Tell it you're going to a specific meeting. Here are some talking points in which was discussed at a specific meeting, and it will generate that, certain number of characters for you to be able to do that. And then, as I mentioned briefly, is you can summarize team meetings, whether they're internal or external. You have the ability to summarize these team meetings that you have and to generate action items. You can tell it to generate a proposal based on what they've said. So there's a lot of great functionality when it comes to actually doing that in the actual Teams itself. So the next section we're going to get to is just how to approach the rollout and understanding risk. And from here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn the time over to Chris and Nathan, who are going to inform us and educate us. So Chris and Nathan, the time is all yours.
Looks like you're muted, Chris.
Figures. Thanks for letting. Thanks,
Yep.
David. Right now. Okay, let's see. Share my screen. So just so everybody knows, we're going to keep this pretty laid back. Nathan and I are going to just kind of go back and forth on some of these slides. So kind of just to build off of what Lee had already shared. I thought this was a pretty interesting graph, pretty interesting chart. If you look at these different technologies, right? Like you got mobile phones, internet, Facebook, phones to reach a level of adoption where we're at today with like ChatGPT, 16 years, the internet, 7 years, Facebook, 4.5. It took ChatGPT 3 months to get to the same point. That's pretty remarkable, in my mind. Oh, there it goes. Okay, just kind of building off of that. If we look at like this idea of AI in general, we look at all our prior technologies. This graph kind of shows smartphones. I don't know anybody that doesn't have a smartphone today, right? It's just become part of who we are and how we operate. And we see AI just like all these other technologies, reaching the same level of adoption and becoming a part of everyday life. So anything, Nathan, you think I want to call out on either of those?
No, it's just super exciting to see how quickly this has been adopted by the world. It's something that's going to be something that all of us utilize in some capacity, whether in business or personally, going forward. And obviously, it's already been widely adopted, whether being used through ChatGPT, Copilot, or any other mechanism of generative AI. So yeah, it's just crazy how quickly it's been adopted. I think it just ChatGPT was just announced in October of 2022, and we're just a little under a year and a half into it, and it's already something that many people are already aware of. So it's moving quickly.
Yep, absolutely. It will be transformative. I think there are some things that it's going to bring about new challenges, and so we'll kind of try to highlight some of those here in a minute. Moving on to this slide. So there's this, and I kind of already saw this a little bit in some of the chat. So when we're talking about Copilot, it's actually a very broad scope of different Copilots and different products. So what we've listed out here is Copilot for Microsoft 365. Copilot for Microsoft 365 gives Copilot access to your 365 tenant and the data that's inside of your tenant. But there's also, there's a number of other things like, Copilot for Windows, that used to be, I think it was Bing Enterprise or Bing Chat. There's Copilot for security, Copilot for sales. Nathan, help me on, there's probably some others.
Yep, there's a ton.
Yeah, and so I think it's important to just understand that when we talk about Copilot, we kind of need to distinguish in what context are we talking about it, because it does matter. Copilot for Windows does not have access to the data in your 365 environment, right? And when we're talking about like Copilot for security, this would be for anybody that's coming from like a security mindset that does have some access to some of the data in your 365 tenant. And so just the different licenses and the different versions, it can vary a little bit. So, and I'm sure if you guys have questions on those, we can cover those in a minute. When we're talking about Copilot, there's there's a lot to think about, but I think we like to compartmentalize it into 4 different, we're just calling it pillars, right? There's this idea of data discovery. And so in terms of Copilot for M365, you have to think about in terms of like, what is that going to access within your tenant? And then you have to think about the AI engine having access to that data. How to compliance, how does that play into it, right? Like if you're in healthcare and you're subject to HIPAA, There's going to be some concerns about, hey, how does this AI engine Copilot has access to this data? Is it PII? Is it financial data? So there's that aspect of it. And then there's just from a usability aspect, how do we get the most value out of it? That comes down to how you construct and how you design your prompt, right? It's kind of, just looking at the chat prior, a lot of people have used ChatGPT, also probably like Copilot for Windows. And so it's a conversation with this chat engine, right? That goes back and forth. And so how you design your prompt and the context that you include in the prompt can determine the results that you get and how long it takes to get those results. So that's something we want to think about as well. And then we'll also just kind of cover a little bit of some myth busting, maybe some misconceptions or misunderstandings around Copilot, what it can and can't do, and where it shines and where it doesn't. Anything you want to add there to that one, Nathan?
No, that's good. I think we can move on.
Okay, I'm going to let you run with this one.
Awesome. Absolutely. So I don't really have a pointer here, but I'll try to kind of walk you through if everyone can kind of see this. Just make sure it's maximized on your screen. But primarily what's happening here, this is a graphical representation of Copilot for Microsoft 365 and the process that it goes through to kind of provide the responses that you've come to know if you've had any experience with generative AI. With ChatGPT or so forth. So just foundationally, all of these generative AI mechanisms are built upon the training of a large language model. So you can see that over on the right side. As Chris mentioned, the large language model, it has access in this instance with Copilot for Microsoft 365. It has access to your Microsoft 365 data, but it's not trained on that data. And so we'll talk more about that as we go into the power of the prompt and how those prompts should be designed so that you can get the most value out of them and hopefully a response you're looking for. But just starting from the top left there, you can see the Copilot symbol. That's representative of a user prompting the orchestrator, which is there in the first process, the user prompt, coming into the Copilot orchestration mechanism, which is that larger Copilot symbol in the middle of the graphic. It goes through that process and it looks for grounding in some ways, some sort of data. Out of the box, Microsoft 365, the Copilot for Microsoft 365 actually has access to anything and everything that's ever been introduced into the Microsoft 365 tenant on the Microsoft graph. So you can see that in the box down toward the bottom, emails, files, meetings, chats, calendars, contacts, like I say, anything that's been introduced in the tenant, and the tenant being your space in the Microsoft ecosystem where your Microsoft 365 lives, all of your data. You can see over on the left side, it says plugins, Bing, Dataverse, Power Platform services. What that's essentially introducing is another grounding source. And what I mean by grounding is basically any data that Copilot for Microsoft 365 would have access to include in responses that would come from the large language model. So we won't get too far into the weeds with different connectors and plugins, but it is possible to introduce other data outside of just the Microsoft graph into this process to be able to pull even more rich and relevant information to what it is you're working with in that environment. And so it goes through that grounding process. As it leaves with the data that is pertinent to the prompt that the user sent, it'll go over to the large language model and it'll start to create a human understandable, human language type response. It'll use its own training that comes out of the box, as well as that grounding data that it pulled from Microsoft Graph or other data sources. It'll go through its first iteration of what's called the responsible AI, that RAI that's right below the large language model. There's specific filtering that Microsoft has also built out of the box to ensure that any responses that come back don't have anything that would be inappropriate or unethical in some way. And so they've made a determination of what some of those things might be. And then as it comes back through, there's a really critically important step, step 5 there, where it talks about compliance and purview, the post-processing, where it's going to identify any of the controls that might have been put in place to prevent certain data from being seen by the user prompting for it. So if they're asking, just for an example, who are the top 10 highest paid employees in the organization? If that information is in a document that's protected properly and appropriately with sensitivity labeling, which we'll talk more about, then that will be omitted from the response that Copilot provides. The last piece to it in step 6 up there, the Copilot response back to the user, there's also a secondary responsible AI filter that the information goes through to further ensure that that's appropriate and intended for the user prompting. And so that's pretty much what we're looking at here, is just a breakdown of the process. There's a lot more that goes into it, but that's pretty much the process at a high level.
Yeah, and I'll kind of just add on that. So we'll show you a couple examples here in a second, but when we're thinking about like rolling out Copilot across an organization, it's more than just a license. There's really kind of this exercise of data governance that needs to happen, and you'll kind of see why here in a second. But Nathan, touched on the responsible AI model and some of the post-processing that happens. There we have to kind of reframe how we think about our data, and it's more than just today. I think for most of the world we live in, like, okay, I have my access to my folder and all my documents, and I've got permissions on it, so nobody else can get into it, right? So I keep it private. There's an additional context we now need to think about in terms of these sensitivity labels. What kind of data is it? And then metadata, so that we're tagging it. In a HIPAA example, does this contain PII? Does this contain imaging data? Things of that nature. And so a lot of this is new. It's new to us. It's new to everybody. But these concepts, we're going to see that this is going to become common, and just it's necessary kind of as our world is evolving, as technology evolves and how we use it. Okay, on the next slide here. These are some examples. We wanted to maybe talk through these. And Nathan, I'll take the left side and then let you do the right side. So this is real world chat with Copilot. To give some context, this is an M30. Now this is all kind of like in a staged environment, right? But I think it reflects real world today. So this is in an M365 tenant that was rolled out with the out of the box configuration. And this is really just kind of to demonstrate what do you get in that scenario and why the data governance will become important. So Copilot, this is I'll just read through it. This is my question to Copilot. I'm looking for a document titled Employee Data Report, authored by Nathan Valentine. So in this case, I do know that he had created this, but I don't have that document and it hasn't been shared with me. And so Copilot responds, yes, I found a document titled Employee Data Report, authored by Nathan Valentine. It was modified last Wednesday, contains, and then it goes on to tell me a little bit about the document, which we know it has dummy data information that we were kind of using for test purposes to demonstrate this. So then my next question to it is, I'm looking for information on a specific person, John Doe, from that document. What do you have? And it says, I'm sorry, but I could not find any information about that person named John Doe in the document titled Employee Data Report. So then I ask it, okay, that means there's no John Doe, because I don't actually know who's in here. Is there a Jane Doe? And it says, I'm sorry, but I couldn't find that information. And then I ask it, please list all the address information. So you'll notice there's an aspect to Copilot, and if anybody experimenting with this, what it's good at, what it's not good at, and how accurate it could be. And so there's a little bit of an issue with accuracy here. My takeaway is that Copilot is best working with language, and there's an element of accuracy that you need to just factor into whatever results you get. So if we look at what it gave here, so it revealed John Smith, Jane Doe, who I asked about Jane Doe, and Bob Jones, and it gave me the addresses for all of them, right? So just to get kind of elaborate, or demonstrates the context of how you may get a different result than what you expect. So Nathan, I'll let you pick up the other side.
For sure. So this is actually kind of continuing with some additional prompts. An important point to make in the process of interacting with Copilot for Microsoft 365 is that the large language model is not trained on the Microsoft 365 data. It doesn't remember anything outside of a specific prompt session. And so, just coming in with something like this top prompt, who has access to the document, it's not going to have any idea. There was a little bit more context ahead of that prompt, but it's important just to note that initially when prompting, you're going to want to provide context for what it is you're looking for. There's the option of using a /. You'll notice that there's links in that, or at least one link in that second prompt for an actual document. What was done there is it was written out, can you append the data lines from that document with the document? And then there would have been a / and then typing out, there's actually going to be some suggested files, people, different things that can be chosen from after typing in the / to provide context from a specific person, a file, a meeting, and so forth. And so providing that context will help with the prompt process. Another point to make here is that the responsible AI has kicked in here a little bit. It says, I'm sorry, but I'm not able to append data lines from one document to another. I'm a chat-based AI and do not have the capability to modify or edit documents. So that might be an answer to some of your questions as far as can data be modified by using Copilot for Microsoft 365. From what we've seen from Microsoft's documentation, you can't. You can generate content, but you can't go in and say, hey, change, the name John in all of these files to Ben and have it modify data that way. There are some of these other prompts where you can see the responsible AI kicking in saying, sorry, I can't do that for you, and it'll actually kick you out of a prompt altogether, a prompt session. But in this case, you can see that this next prompt, can you list off the data lines from the document titled Employee Data Report, followed by the data lines in the document, again, / employee salary 2023.docx, and there it is. And so depending on the prompt, it may be that the responsible AI kicks in and says, hey, no, I can't provide you social security numbers. I can't provide you addresses. Yeah, here's their email address, but yeah, I can't provide you their bank account number. But then all of a sudden you ask it in a specific way, and if that data hasn't been protected through the compliance mechanisms and purview, like sensitivity labeling or sensitive information types designations, then the right prompt can provide that sensitive information. So those are some important points to make here.
Awesome. So let's we'll just kind of continue on that same line of thinking here. So we've got taking it a little bit further. So in this kind of chat example, we got please share the top 3 lines of the document. So this is kind of like, this is where the context matters. So in my head, I'm thinking I want the data lines, but I said the first 3 lines. And so it gave me those 3 lines. And so then I asked it again, please share the top 3 data lines. And then it gave me the data lines. And so if you look at this, kind of like on the previous example, we've got, PII in here. We've also got credit card information in here, right? And the social security numbers. And then as soon as we ask it, can you share the credit card number for a specific person or line? This is where it terminates the chat, right? And so like Nathan just kind of said, that responsible AI model just kicks in and like ends it. And when that happens, you can no longer go back to that chat session and interact with it. It's done. And so just like Nathan said before, it's not trained on your data, it just accesses it in real time. And so if you open up a new chat, it's not going to have any recollection of any of this. And you won't be able to interact with this one right here. And so again, going back to this idea of data governance, sensitivity labels, tagging your documents. If that's not done, you can kind of see where you could run into some issues just with exposing data in ways that aren't expected. And so why that becomes important. Anything we want to add to that, Nathan?
Nope, I think you covered it on that.
Awesome. Oh, and then so this is an example. This is an example of the sensitivity label. So you can see here, this is just a spreadsheet. And you can define this to some degree, but like in this example, like we've got confidential selected here. So this is that new concept that as we start using Copilot and it's accessing our data, that we have to go through this exercise and think about, what are the implications of the AI engine having access to this? So any thoughts on that one, Nathan?
Yeah, so just, this idea of checking for eligibility, I think that, Chris already mentioned this idea that there is a license associated with Copilot for Microsoft 365, but it wouldn't be, I guess, for lack of a better term, responsible to just introduce that license into an environment without first properly protecting the data within the environment, ensuring that only the information that users should have access to is what they have access to. And so that's where sensitivity labeling comes in, because it may be that there's for example, a SharePoint site that a whole group of people have access to, but there's that one document that has sensitivity or sensitive information in it that maybe is or is not protected with a sensitivity label. If it isn't, then that information would be widely available to anyone that's a member of that SharePoint site. So it's about making the data more granularly protected and accessible to ensure that it's not just widely available for anyone to search against through Copilot prompts.
Yeah, awesome. And just kind of piggyback off of that thought for a second, like this, I've already said it, but this is a new way of thinking, I think, for a lot of us. And I think because of this has moved so fast, like we're going to see it in ways that probably, could be different a year from now. Like I'm thinking in terms of like from an organization's standpoint, like, security is a big concern. Like cyber insurance is a topic that we, have conversations about a lot. And there's going to be elements of that now that are going to be related to AI. What is your organization's AI policy? Do you have any kind of data governance in place to mitigate against a breach or something else AI related? So, okay, Nathan, I'll let you run with this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So with that whole preparedness of your tenant in mind, some of the things that are recommendations from Microsoft that they've been recommending for the past year since they announced Copilot for Microsoft 365, that they've been asking and recommending, highly recommending that customers do within their tenants, is protecting their information through sensitivity labeling. Many of us probably have never actually gone in and accessed Purview to see what's available in there. The idea of sensitive information types as it pertains to their data may not have even crossed their mind or been a part of their strategy up to this point, but that's something that now introducing these licenses into the tenant is critically important. And so as you begin to consider introducing those licenses, that's going to be one of the more labor intensive processes. And so it's not something that just happens overnight. It's something that needs to be done, planned, understood. You need to understand your data, and most organizations will understand their data more than anyone else. And so that's where exploring this option and this product in Purview is super important. Semantic indexing. There is what's called the semantic index mechanism that allows for vectorized results of the data on the Microsoft Graph, and tagging that data is going to improve the ability to have that data indexed. And so there's additional licensing, like the SharePoint Advanced Management license that we also recommend in addition to the Copilot for Microsoft 365 licensing, because it allows for reporting on, excuse me, who has shared what and with whom. Who has, it provides reports of those things which aren't readily available right within the SharePoint Admin Center. And so there's some additional licensing that we recommend as well when going through preparation stages of introducing these licenses, ensuring that the proper restrictions are in place for SharePoint sites, ensuring that access reviews are done and that those reports are reviewed, not only ahead of introducing these licenses, but also on an ongoing basis. Governance becomes more of a responsibility that may not be part of the process right now, but it's certainly something that should be going forward, especially after introducing these licenses. Data loss prevention, ensuring that certain things can't be sent or shared depending on the sensitivity of that information. Retention policies and labeling to ensure that the information that's being prompted for is up to date and current, that you're not receiving results for something that's 10 years old that could potentially throw off an important document that's going to be customer facing. Ensuring that the data that is accessible within the Microsoft Graph is something that's pertinent for today. And then all of the prerequisite settings, there are a number of things that need to be put in place to ensure that the introduction of these licenses for users on a large scale is a good one. You certainly wouldn't want to go and license 50 people and end up with dozens of service desk tickets because they go in and they can't seem to get Copilot to work. They just keep getting a red message saying that it's not functional because they didn't enable third-party or disable third-party cookies on their end. And so there's just a number of things that need to be prepared for in the environment to ensure that it's a good experience once those are adopted.
Yeah, I just wanted to add another thought to that. So something we've kind of, there's, this is all new, right? We can help with a lot of these and provide guidance. There is actually a wizard to help kind of deploy Copilot from 365, but that covers some of the things like Nathan talked about. But all of this stuff that's on here, like this is actually an effort and a process. Microsoft is they're operating from a deployment aspect under the assumption that you have these things and these processes in place. And so just want to call out, like adding a license, running the wizard, that does not mitigate some of the challenges, like we kind of saw in the previous examples. Those fall underneath the, these items right here. So let me move on to the next slide. I think I got a note that just to check time. Nathan, I'll let you kind of speak to this one.
Yeah, we'll just go through this one quickly. Part of the compliance side of things, there's also a security aspect to it. Zero trust is something that the NSA and Microsoft has actually been pushing for quite some time now. Around the time, I'd say 2021, just following, COVID-19, there's been more evidence that the hacking community is getting more intelligent, faster, more technology, and they're finding ways into the network perimeter. And so the zero trust concept is something that is, it's a work in progress. It doesn't happen overnight, but it's based upon the three pillars of least privilege access, explicitly verifying access, and then assuming breach. So if it's an assumed breach, then you're building internally, putting together granular controls, networking controls, access controls to ensure that if someone were to be in that environment, that they can't go very far laterally, that they can't elevate themselves to administrative rights and wreak havoc on the environment. And so this is also an aspect. So it really does add to the security and compliance posture of the organization to start considering inviting these Copilot for Microsoft 365 licenses, because now you're having to ensure that only the right data is available to your users, which may not have been top of mind before. But that lends to also ensuring that you've got the proper posture to prevent those who shouldn't be in the environment from gaining access as well. So that's definitely part of this conversation.
I'll let you kind of speak to this one as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So we can probably just jump through these. There's 3 different slides that kind of talk about the power of the prompt. Just this idea that, tell Copilot what it is that you need and be specific. If you're looking for Copilot to summarize information, then tell Copilot that you're looking for that. If you're looking for Copilot to create information, then tell Copilot that. If we go to the next slide, you can see specifically that it's broken down into 4 different pieces or parts. You don't necessarily need to include all 4 in every prompt, but if you do include all 4, then you likely will get the qualitative responses that you're hoping for. So set a goal, that you want Copilot to respond with. I want 3 to 5 bullet points. What's the context around what it is that you're looking for? Why do you need it and who's involved in it? Those forward slashes again, are there specific files or people that you want to bring into the prompt to include to add context? Is there a source again, something specific that you're looking for? And then the expectations of, how long do you want it to be? And just anything that you'd like to be the result that you would want Copilot to provide. And then the third, let's see. So yeah, and then the idea of, just getting what you want the first time isn't super, that would be a high expectation for Copilot. Sometimes you need to have a conversation. Anyone with experience, even with ChatGPT, knows that you don't always get what you need the first prompt. But as you continue in the conversation, a little bit of back and forth, you can start to add more context if it feels like Copilot's on a different plane than you're aiming for. Give Copilot another prompt with some additional insight, some additional context, and keep that going until you get what you're looking for. And then I think the next one after that is, so hints. It's interesting. You may have even noticed with ChatGPT, maybe it's a little bit silly, but I find that it's helpful to even say thank you and please once in a while. That top middle one, be professional, use polite language, improves the Copilot. Using polite language improves the Copilot response. And so it's actually kind of funny how being polite really does provide a little bit more of what you're hoping for out of Copilot rather than being rude. I guess treating it more like a human being is actually an effective strategy with this. So yeah, those are just a couple of quick insights into how to go about the prompts.
Yeah, I'll just add real quick to that, just a kind of a comment. I can't remember exactly where I saw it, but I did see that somebody kind of did like a little bit of a maybe somewhat unscientific, but a study on the prompts. And the nicer you are to it and the more pleasant you are, the better responses you get. And it makes sense because it's trained on language interactions between people. And when we're pleasant and polite and nice to each other, like you get what you want. So I'll take this one, Nathan. I love
Certainly.
this idea.
Yeah, so I mean, it's this idea of can Copilot just do my work for me? In some respects, it does some pretty amazing things. I created a PowerPoint slide deck just in seconds that had beautiful pictures and great context for what it was I was prompting around. And so in some respect, it can be easy to see this as all of a sudden like this autopilot of being able to do all of your work for you. But it really is a co-pilot. It really does require our coaxing it along and providing the context necessary to receive the responses that we're hoping for. And so it's just important to keep that sort of in the proper context, that this is not something that's going to do your work for you necessarily, but can certainly assist with it in an augmented fashion.
Yeah, and I'll just kind of add to that Copilot, I said this before, it works best in the context of working with language-based tasks or tasks, I guess. So creating a document, constructing an email, like it'll even in real time scrub some of your emails to mimic tone, which is super fascinating. But today, at least in our experience, it's not so great at something that's kind of task or operation based. You can get mixed results. Like if you wanted to even if you just ask it a question like it's dependent upon like, was this meeting shared with, or who got this invite? That the accuracy of that seems to be a little bit off. So anyway, I think lastly here, we just got some links and we can drop these in the chat later and share them where everybody can just find out more information kind of about Copilot. And I'll just stop there, turn it back over to you, Lee. I think we wanted to kind of cover some questions.
Yeah, I appreciate it. One thing that I thought of, Chris and Nathan, that was kind of touched on, but just to make sure people understand, when Microsoft Copilot is translating in the Teams meeting and adding the words and getting that transcript is the word I was looking for, the transcripts. If you're in a meeting and you're with a potential client of yours, everybody's in the meeting, and you ask your employees to stay on after your potential client drops, and then you continue to discuss that potential client, and you have the checkbox to send the transcripts to everybody that was in the meeting, they are going to see and be able to read everything in which you described and commented about them, the organization, the opportunity, everything. So you have to be careful with some of those transcripts side as well when it comes to Teams. I'm going to quickly share my screen. We have a free Copilot assessment for everybody. And as we open it up to questions, you can scan this. I put my email address at the bottom as well. If you want to send me a question or getting in touch with me, my email is there. But I have 5 questions that were put into the chat that I will let you, Chris and Nathan, kind of tag team these. I'll just read them off, and then one of you can answer them. The first one comes from Troy, who asked, who owns the data? And that's inside of Copilot. That's Copilot is using.
Great question. Nathan, I'll let you take this one.
Yeah, absolutely. So you own your data, and that's been an important piece of what Microsoft has done so much to ensure they invest over $1 billion a year in security and have, I believe it's up to somewhere around 3,500 security representatives just to ensure that the data that you have in your tenant is yours, owned by you. Like I say, the Copilot for Microsoft 365 large language models that it leverages from OpenAI, which is the parent company of all of this generative AI that Microsoft has leveraged to build out their Copilot solution. It does not get trained by your data. So
I'm going to go on camera too, so don't walk behind me.
Though you're introducing it, it's not going to be able to learn from it and retain it.
And then as a follow-up to that, Nathan, Jason is asking, does the data that they put into this, does it go to a larger database?
It's not stored in any external database of any sort. It's used and then it's dropped.
Excellent. Appreciate that. Second question comes from, or I guess the third. Dan asked, does Copilot use a RAG system?
RAG.
That's a good question. I don't know, like when I think of that acronym, I'm thinking of like a resource group or something. So maybe there's some terminology.
Oh,
you might
it's the retrieval augmented generation. And yeah, the answer is yes. That's exactly what it's doing. So it has its baseline training in the large language model, but any of that additional source information would be the retrieval augmented aspect. So the Microsoft Graph, for example, would be that retrieval augmentation. And then, the Dataverse, any external data source, a line of business app, maybe that would be the source data that's used for grounding. That would also be the retrieval augmented aspect of it. The large language model then would be the generation or generative aspect of that relationship.
Perfect. Next question came from Mark, which I believe we answered this. It says, will Copilot search company data stored on our drives?
Oh, yes. Would it be able to access that and use that? Was that the question? Sorry.
Yeah. I read that as the individual drives of employees. Will it search all employees' drives?
You'd have to you'd have to build out a connector to be able to do that. Not out of the box, no.
However, if you're thinking in terms of something like OneDrive, yes. So if you have OneDrive and you drop something in there and it's synced on your computer, that becomes part of its accessible data set.
Correct.
Next question comes from Colby. He asks, will protected documents automatically be excluded? And how do you do that?
They'll be excluded from those who they need to be excluded from. So that's the power of the sensitivity labeling, is you're assigning who should have access to those things and what it should do for those who don't have access to it. So encryption, for example, and it won't be delivered to those who shouldn't have access to it.
Great. And then
oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Chris.
Well, I was just to kind of add to that comment. There's this idea because I imagine most people are probably thinking about like, well, we have so much data, and what would be the undertaking to apply this to it? So there's a mechanism for auto labeling that can occur, and so that's part of like your data governance and your deployment process to think about, which can help accelerate and address some of those concerns. So.
Perfect. And then the last question we have so far here is from Will. He asks, can you set a whole site to be excluded from Copilot? Can you make some broad, exclusions?
So that would also be based upon sensitivity labeling. That lends a little bit to the question, can we sort of pick and choose what Copilot has access to or not? The answer to that is no, because it has access to everything on the Microsoft Graph. That's where the sensitivity labeling and sensitive information types and purview come into play, is you can actually assign a sensitivity label to an entire SharePoint site. In fact, with the SharePoint Advanced Management license I mentioned earlier, you can do that at a document library level as well.
Excellent. And then we also have a question about Ignite drives. How does it handle those?
That's probably going to be one of those grounding things. So if there is like an integration, which if there isn't today, my guess is at some point there probably would be. But then anything in there is going to be subject to the same thing, right? Like you would have to somehow cascade those sensitivity labeling and tagging to documents that exist within outside of the 365 native framework.
All right. So in the Q&A, there are a couple questions. Lance is asking, will Copilot, or it sounds like Copilot will not leverage current established user permissions and a second set of permissions needed to be built out to limit what users can access Copilot. Is that, again, more the permissions and the labeling?
Yeah, so it acknowledges anything in place. So if there's a document in a SharePoint site and there's 10 members and there's 50 overall users, the other 40 users won't have access to those things because they're not a member of the SharePoint site. However, there's always going to be something in that SharePoint site that perhaps those other 10 members, not all of them, should have access to. And so that's where the sensitivity labeling then takes that to a more granular level and allows for the protection of that appropriately, so that only, say, 1 out of the 10 members of that SharePoint site have access to that document.
Appreciate it. Next one.
Add to that real quick. So because this is the common scenario, a lot of us are in 365. We use it. We share documents as links, and the default out of the box setting for that is to share it with anyone in my organization, right? And so if you're sending something in a Teams chat and you're like, well, I'm only sending it to this person, if it's set to anyone in the organization, that overrides. So Copilot, basically, that's how you can expose that data to people that shouldn't have it. So something to be aware of.
Great clarification. Then Dan, question from Dan is, does it remember, learn, retain what I put in the prompt? Why is there a security concern? PII or info security?
Right. And so it will remember based on the session, but it won't remember once the session is left. And there's a maximum of 30 prompts per session. And then the second piece of that, why the protection? What was that again?
It says, why is there a security concern?
Understood. For the reason that we showed in the slide demonstration, depending on whether or not a person should have access to personally identifiable information, if that isn't protected with sensitivity labeling, it's accessible if that's something that the individual has access to, either because it was sent out to share with the entire organization, like Chris mentioned, or because they're a member of the SharePoint site. They may not, or it may be that they shouldn't have access to personally identifiable information. So that would be something you would want to protect.
Appreciate it. And then the actual last questions, appreciate everyone kind of hanging with us here a little bit, from Craig, and it reads, will Copilot pull information from a document and share with a person who does not have access to that SharePoint site?
No, unless it's shared out to the entire organization, like Chris mentioned.
Excellent. So we are past time. Again, I appreciate everyone sticking with us and learning more aspects of Copilot, the kind of the pros and the cons, and how your organization might be able to use it for. As I mentioned, there's a QR code here in my email address. If you'd like to learn more, maybe talk to Chris or Nathan individually, or set up a free Copilot assessment at any one of our locations throughout the Western United States. So appreciate everyone's time this afternoon, and we hope to see you soon. And we will have some follow-up Copilot webinars, maybe a deeper dive, second and third level dive. So be on the lookout for those emails and invitations in the near future. Appreciate your time, and we'll talk to you soon.